Beloved, there comes a time in every life when the weight of the world feels too heavy, when the nights seem longer than the days, and when the questions in your heart drown out every answer. You may have tried to carry the burden on your own, running after solutions, chasing after people, and leaning on your own strength, only to find yourself empty again. But let me tell you this: the moment you start with God, everything changes. The pain that once crushed you becomes the very ground where hope is planted. The fear that once chained your mind becomes the fuel for your faith. When you start with God, you do not start with weakness but with power. You do not start with confusion but with clarity. You do not start with defeat but with victory already secured. Do not wait until everything falls apart to turn to Him. Begin with Him. Trust Him with your first breath in the morning and your last whisper at night. The greatest mistake is thinking you can begin without God. The greatest wisdom is knowing that every true beginning must start with Him. Life is a building, and every choice we make lays a brick. Some try to build their lives on wealth, but wealth can vanish overnight. Others build on relationships, but people can change and hearts can break. Still others build on their own strength, yet strength eventually fades. But when you build on God, you build on something eternal, unshakable, and everlasting. Storms may come, winds may blow, but a foundation in God does not crumble. When the floods of life rise, His word holds you steady. His love keeps you anchored, and His promises become your shelter. Every foundation without God is temporary, but with Him, your life is built on rock. The world tells you to start with ambition, confidence, and skill, but God tells you to start with Him. For He is the beginning, the middle, and the end of every secure life. Think of the countless people who once seemed unstoppable, but crumbled because their foundation was wrong. Success without God is like a house of cards, beautiful on the outside, fragile within. Real security comes when God is your first step, your first thought, and your first source. That's why every strong foundation begins in Him. There was once a man who dreamed of building a home that would last for generations. He saved, he planned, and he worked tirelessly. But in his hurry, he chose cheap land with poor soil because it was convenient. At first, everything looked perfect. Walls stood tall, rooms were filled with laughter, and life seemed unshakable. Then came a storm. The ground beneath gave way, the foundation cracked, and the home that once felt so permanent collapsed. Heartbroken, he realized the mistake. He had invested in beauty but neglected the foundation. Later, he rebuilt, this time choosing solid ground and sturdy stone. It took longer, it cost more, but when the storms returned, his house stood firm. Our lives mirror this truth. How often do we chase quick gains, temporary happiness, and easy roads, only to watch them fall apart when storms come? Building on God may take more patience, more trust, and more surrender, but it gives you something storms cannot steal: endurance. A heart anchored in Him stands unshaken, not because storms don't come, but because the foundation cannot fail. When you build on God, you are building on truth, not opinion. Opinions change with culture, but God's word never shifts. What was true yesterday is still true today and will remain true tomorrow. In a world that tells you make your own truth, God whispers, I am the truth. And when your foundation is His word, you are not tossed around by the changing winds of life. You walk steady because you know the ground under your feet will not move. Imagine someone trying to walk across a frozen lake. If the ice is thin, every step is terrifying, because danger is beneath their feet. But if the ice is thick and strong, they walk freely, confidently, without fear. That is the difference between building on shifting sands and building on God's solid truth. When you build on Him, fear loses its grip because you know the ground beneath you is strong enough to hold. The world shakes, but you remain standing. Every strong foundation begins in God because He alone is unchanging, eternal, and trustworthy. The beauty of a strong foundation is not seen in calm seasons, but revealed in storms. Anyone can look steady when the sun is shining, but true strength is tested when the winds howl. If your life is built on God, you may bend, but you will not break. You may feel the rain, but you will not drown. Storms do not destroy you, They prove the power of the foundation holding you up. Every hardship becomes evidence that God is your anchor. Think of a tree planted by the riverside. Its roots run deep, drinking from waters that never run dry. When drought comes, it still stands green because its source is unseen. That is how a life built on God looks. On the surface, storms may rage, but underneath, unseen roots hold you. This is why some people collapse under pressure while others grow stronger in trials. The difference is not the storm. The difference is the foundation. Build deep in Him, and no storm will ever define you. Instead, storms will refine you, making your foundation stronger. Every strong foundation begins in God because He is the architect of life. He knows the weight your heart can bear, the cracks that need healing, and the storms that lie ahead. When you surrender to Him, you are not giving up control. You are stepping into security. You are saying, I trust the one who holds the blueprint of my life. Without Him, you're guessing where to build. With Him, you are guided to the solid ground that never fails. A foundation in God does more than hold you. It shapes you. It gives you peace when the world says panic. It gives you strength when your own strength is gone. It gives you hope when everything around you says it's over. And the truth is, many people discover this too late, after they've built on sand and watched it fall. But you have the chance today to choose differently. Every strong foundation begins not with your plans, not with your strength, but with Him, the only rock that time, trial, and storm cannot move. There are people who spend their whole lives chasing peace, yet it always feels out of reach. They run after success, thinking peace will come when they finally arrive. Others chase relationships, hoping another person will fill the emptiness inside. Some try to control every detail of life, believing peace will be found when nothing goes wrong. But true peace is never found in control. It is found in surrender. When you surrender to God, you release the need to carry what you were never meant to carry. You lay down the weight of worry, the burden of fear, the endless striving to fix everything on your own. And in return, God gives you a peace that doesn't make sense to the world, a peace that remains even when circumstances are hard. A peace that holds your heart steady when everything around you shakes. Surrender is not weakness. It is the most powerful step you can take, because it places your life in the hands of the one who cannot fail. Peace is not about having everything perfect. It is about trusting the one who is perfect. There was once a woman who lived with constant fear. Her son was ill, and no medicine seemed to work. Night after night she stayed awake, pacing the floor, praying, but holding on tightly to her own solutions. She begged, cried, and tried everything she could, yet the more she struggled, the heavier her heart became. One night, exhausted beyond words, she finally whispered, God, I cannot carry this anymore. I give him to you. That moment of surrender was the turning point. She didn't stop loving or caring, but she stopped trying to control what only God could handle. A strange calm filled her, a peace she had never felt before. Days later, the child began to recover slowly, but her miracle had begun the moment she surrendered. The story is the reality of life. We carry battles that don't belong to us, and the weight steals our peace. But when we surrender, God steps in. He doesn't just lift the burden, He replaces it with peace. That is the beauty of surrender. The moment you release control, you discover freedom you never knew you needed. Surrender is not giving up, it is giving over. The world tells you to keep fighting for control, to hold tighter when life slips from your hands, to fix what is broken by your own strength. But that path only leads to exhaustion. True surrender is different. It is the quiet courage to say, God, I trust you more than I trust myself. And that's when His peace flows. Peace does not come from knowing the outcome. Peace comes from knowing the one who holds the outcome. When you surrender, you stop asking why and start saying, I trust. You stop clinging to fear and start resting in faith. Think of a child in their father's arms. The child doesn't know where the journey's going, doesn't understand every twist or turn, but feels safe because they know their father is carrying them. That is surrender. It is resting in God's arms, not because you see the path, but because you know He sees it. That is where peace is born. Not from your grip, but from your release. The greatest enemy of peace is control. We think if we plan hard enough, work long enough, and worry deep enough, we can keep life in order, but control is an illusion. Storms come without warning, doors close without explanation, and even the strongest hands slip. When you live trying to control everything, anxiety becomes your companion, and peace stays far away. But the moment you surrender, peace becomes your reality. You no longer carry the pressure to figure everything out. You no longer fear the unknown because you trust the one who knows. A surrendered heart is a light heart. It no longer drags the weight of yesterday or the fear of tomorrow. It lives in the present, fully trusting God with what has not yet come. That's why people who truly surrender seem unshaken, not because their lives are easy, but because they are anchored in peace. They are free from the endless cycle of fear, worry, and control. They have found the secret. Peace is not about controlling life. It is about surrendering life into God's control. Surrender is the doorway to peace because it leads you to intimacy with God. When you hold on tightly to your own strength, you keep Him at a distance. But when you let go, you open space for His presence to fill you, and where His presence is, peace always follows. The world cannot give this kind of peace, and the world cannot take it away. It is the peace that guards your mind when you should be anxious. The peace that steadies your heart when others collapse. The peace that whispers, "You are safe in me." Every strong soul you see walking through storms with calm has discovered this secret. They surrendered. They didn't fight for control. They trusted God with the outcome. Their peace is not natural, it is supernatural. It is the fruit of a surrendered life. That is why surrender is not a loss, but a gain. You don't lose yourself in surrender. You find the best version of yourself, grounded in God's peace. And once you taste it, you will never go back to living under the crushing weight of control again. Life often feels like a battlefield where you wake up each morning fighting for survival, fighting against fear, fighting against doubt, fighting against failure, fighting against the voices that tell you you will never make it. Many people enter the battle already defeated in their minds because they believe victory is something they must earn, something they must win by sheer strength and endless striving. But when you start with God, you do not fight for victory, you fight from victory. The difference is life-changing. Victory is not something you chase, it is something already promised. The cross secures it, His word confirms it, and His Spirit empowers it. When you begin with Him, you are not starting from weakness, but from strength. You are not starting from uncertainty, but from assurance. The outcome has already been decided before the battle begins. This is why the enemy tries to distract you into starting with yourself, because he knows that when you start with God, you are unshakable. Victory is not at the finish line, it is at the starting line when you choose Him as your source. There was once a young man who grew up hearing the word failure echo in his ears. Teachers told him he would never succeed, friends mocked him, and even his own family doubted his worth. He tried to prove them wrong, but every attempt ended in frustration. One day, broken and tired, he walked into a small church and heard the words, "You are more than a conqueror through Him who loves you." Something inside him shifted. For the first time, he realized victory was not about proving others wrong, but about walking with God who had already declared him victorious. From that day on, his perspective changed. Challenges didn't vanish, but he faced them with courage. He stopped living to silence voices and started living to glorify God. Years later, the same boy people called a failure became a leader, helping others discover their worth. His story reminds us that victory begins not when you overcome, but when you start with the one who has already overcome. The battle does not define you, the God who fights for you does. And in Him, victory is not a dream, but a certainty. When you start with God, you stop living in fear of losing and start living with the assurance of winning. Fear whispers, "What if I fail?" But faith declares, God has already made me victorious. This mindset doesn't make life easy, but it changes the way you walk through it. The one who starts with God walks into the storm knowing the outcome is already secured. This is why David could face Goliath with a sling and a stone, because his confidence was not in his weapon, but in his God. Goliath mocked, armies trembled, but David declared, "The battle is the Lord's." And in that moment, victory was sealed before the stone even flew. That is the power of starting with God. It doesn't matter how big the giant is. What matters is who goes before you. Giants fall not because you are strong, but because God is greater. And when you understand this, you no longer run from battles, you run into them with faith. Victory is not uncertain when you start with God. It is already yours, written into the story before you take the first step. Starting with God also means that setbacks cannot steal your victory. Many people confuse setbacks with defeat. They believe that if something doesn't go as planned, the battle is lost. But in God's plan, even delays and detours are part of victory. Joseph was betrayed by his brothers, thrown into a pit, sold into slavery, and imprisoned for years. To the world, he looked like a man defeated. But Joseph started with God, and because his foundation was in him, every setback became a setup for a greater victory. In the end, the same man who was thrown into a pit was raised to a palace to save nations. This truth is for you too. Your present struggle does not define your final outcome. The battle you are in now may look overwhelming, but if you started with God, then your victory is already guaranteed. The enemy may try to delay it, distract you, or discourage you, but he cannot destroy what God has already sealed. Starting with him means no battle is wasted. Even what was meant for harm becomes part of your triumph. The victory is not only in what you gain, but also in who you become as you trust him. Victory is already yours when you start with God, because he never loses. Every promise he makes stands unbroken. Every word he speaks carries power. Every step he leads you into is backed by his authority. When you walk in alignment with him, you walk in victory, even when your eyes cannot see it. That's why true victory is not measured by circumstances, but by faith. The world may look at you and see struggle, but heaven looks at you and sees a conqueror. You are not fighting alone. You are standing with the one who has already declared, "It is finished." Think of battles in your own life that once felt impossible, but looking back, you see how God carried you through. That is proof of his victory. If he was faithful then, he will be faithful now. And the truth is, no matter what comes against you, when you start with him, the outcome is secure. The story is not about how strong you are, but about how faithful he is. And in that faithfulness lies the unshakable truth. The victory is already yours. When we look back at everything shared, one truth stands tall. Life only makes sense when it begins, continues, and ends with God. Every strong foundation is unshakable because it is built on him. Peace is not found in control, but in surrender. And when we release the weight of our worries, his calm floods our souls. Victory is not something we chase with trembling hands. It is already ours when we choose to start with him. The storms may rage, the voices of doubt may rise, and the battles may look impossible. But those who walk with God never walk in defeat. He has already written your story, and it ends in triumph. Do not lean on your own understanding. Do not depend on temporary ground, but trust the rock who cannot be moved. No matter where you are today, you can begin again. And if you begin with him, you will end in glory. May these words not only stir your heart, but strengthen your faith to rise, to trust, and to walk in confidence, knowing you are never alone. Thank you for listening. May God bless you abundantly, and may his peace fill your heart always.